checkpoint. Only there goes Okay, so good morning, everybody. I wanted to talk about collaboration. Just have the guys in the back, come and see. Okay, so I want to talk about collaboration, and because it's very early in the morning, I wanted to give you some kind of a quiz, and I wanted to ask you what's in common between these three different things. We have penguins, Wikipedia, and Star Wars. Okay, must have to do with the topic of today's talk. But anyway, it's all about collaboration. There may be other reasons or commonalities that you may think of, but I want to talk about collaboration. So, looking at collaboration, Linux, I think, is one of the most well-known collaboration pieces of software that have been developed and continuously being developed, and it's about the collaboration between many, many different individuals, software coders, or programmers around the world. So I think that's one example, and that's the penguins, okay? Wikipedia, don't have to say a lot about it, but it's all about collaboration. There's about 16 million different entries contributed by 4 million, plus minus 4 million people, if you read in the different statistics. But nowadays, if you're looking for a specific item, whatever, you don't go into the traditional encyclopedias anymore, you go to Wikipedia, which is a real collaboration between all of us. And then the mystery is about Star Wars. What does Star Wars have to do with collaboration? So I want to talk about Star Wars Uncut. So for all these geeks in the room, I'm sure they're, Avi and I are the only geeks here, but the Star Wars Uncut is this movie that was done in 2010. And what did they do? They took episode 4 of Star Wars and they cut it into 15-second segments. And they gave the entire fan community of Star Wars to actually do remakes, so 15-second remakes of Star Wars. And they glued it all together into a 2-hour movie. I suggest you watch it into YouTube, but just to show you a glimpse of that. It's a real masterpiece in collaboration. This actually got the Emmy Award in 2010 as the most creative, one of the creative establishments that were done, but it was actually got an Emmy in 2010 and actually working on a second movie. Some of you, I'm sure you can actually take out this URL website and actually going to check it out today. Anyway, so collaboration is about creating shared value. It's about building shared value between multiple different people. And when we talk about collaboration, I would really like to talk about it from about 3 different aspects. So collaboration, first of all, is about collective knowledge. And when we talk about collective knowledge, it's about development of different assets, of knowledgement assets, based on a distributed pool of contributors. So you have pool of contributors all adding together in order to develop knowledge, develop different assets. That's number one. Secondly, when talking about collaboration, is collective creativity. And here we're taking or tapping talent or creative talent between different people in order to provide better design, better products. And finally, it's collective education. And here we're talking about sharing information between different individuals in order, with their distributed experience, in order to enrich ourselves. So when talking about collaboration, you're really talking about these 3 different things. And how do you want to how are we creating more shared value between all of us together in order to really enrich in ourselves, enrich in our environment today? I want to give one example, and I want to use the medical research as a very good example of how collaboration goes to its best. When I'm talking about the medical environment, the medical research, I want to talk about the medical research against pandemics and viruses. Why? I think you all know, but it's very, very similar to our world. But before we do that, let's educate ourselves a bit about pandemics and medical research.
This is an influenza virus. This is the world. How can a virus change the world? Here's how. A virus survives by jumping from one host to another, hijacking its cells for its own malevolent purposes. With each jump, the virus mutates slightly. Enough mutations and our little virus can jump to different species. Keep in mind that influenza tends to jump from birds and pigs to humans, and industrial agriculture amplifies the problem by cramming birds and pigs together in generally nasty conditions. So let's say the virus jumps into a human host. Worse, this iteration is capable of jumping from human to human. This first case is called the index patient. He unknowingly infects other people around him. Those people infect more people and so on until we have an epidemic. Now let's say that epidemic continues to spread unchecked across the planet, like Bieber fever, but deadlier. This is called a pandemic. What happens when a pandemic strikes? In 1918, the Spanish flu caused 50 million deaths. That's more casualties than World War I, which happened to be going on at the same time. P.S. It wasn't just the old and weak, it was the young and healthy that got it the worst. But it's not always so nasty. In 2003, SARS was curbed before it got out of hand.
So, sounds very familiar, and to our world that we've been talking at least for about the last 2 days. And, as it said in that very short clip, just giving one example, the Spanish flu in 1918, about 50 to 1 million different casualties. Now, the Spanish flu was a 2-year flu. It was a 2-year pandemic from January 1918, and it's finished, or basically most of it concluded in December 1920. 2 years, 50 to 1 million casualties. If you take another example, in the recent years, the H1N1, 2009, it was over in a matter of months, and it's about 14,000 casualties. Now, the thing is that 14,000 casualties is a lot, it's a large number. The thing is that both of them, the Spanish flu and the pandemic H1N1, were the same sort of flu. It's the same sort of strain of flu, were very, very similar to each other. One of them took 2 years to recover from, 50 to 100 million casualties, and here we see a smaller number, and it took months for us to recover from. And the question that we ask ourselves in this environment is, what was the difference? So there are many, many, many different reasons for that difference between the Spanish flu in 1918, the beginning of the 20th century, and the pandemic here. But the question is, how did it stop? Okay? And I think one of the main reasons it stopped was because of this concept of medical research collaboration. Collaborating in order to provide better cures and to recover fast, which wasn't something that was available in the 1918s. It was a lot more difficult. So when we're talking about medical collaboration, we're really talking about 4 different aspects, or 4 different stages. Stage number 1 is about the fact that you have different hospitals, medical institutes that are sharing information with each other. They're sharing symptoms. They're sharing different pieces of this jigsaw puzzle with each other. So there's a patient in one place around the world, another patient around the world. They're sharing symptoms with each other. This information is basically sent to all kinds of research institutes in order to identify the flu strains. That's what they're doing. Okay, that's the second step, trying to take the different pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, bringing them all together in order to create one big picture. Out of that, they're actually developing vaccines. So they're developing the cures in order to recover from that. So once they were able to create this larger picture out of these different pieces of the puzzle, they were able to actually develop vaccines, and then the last piece is actually to distribute the cure and the vaccines around the world, globally. So we see actually 4 different elements. They're all about collaboration of data, the research, and the development of the cure, and then actually the distribution. It's interesting here. This is a Director General of the World Health Organization. It's actually interesting to see what she had to say at the time about the H1N1 pandemic. She was saying first, it's a characteristic feature of pandemics as their rapid spread around the world very, very fast. Then she also said, in the previous centuries, this spread has typically taken around 6 to 9 months. And as we know, in our world, it's also a lot faster these days. And then finally, very interesting that I found that she was saying is, we're all in this together, and we will all get through this together. Okay? It's about collaboration and sharing that will make, in that world of the pandemics, recover very, very fast, or as faster than what we had in the beginning of the 20th century. The thing is that it's not always easy. So collaboration looks like the best ideal in the world, and it looks always very, very easy and simple. But it's not always that trivial.
Hey! What's this lying around shit? Well, what the hell is supposed to do, you moron?
War's over, man. Wormer dropped the big one.
What? What the fuck happened to the Delta I used to know?
So collaboration isn't always easy, and it sometimes is challenging, as we just saw. And if you look in our world and in other worlds, some of the reasons why collaboration is challenging is because, you see organizations that say, I don't want to share. I'm afraid of, sharing I may be losing my intellectual property. So that's one of the reasons why sometimes it doesn't work that way, or it's challenging. Another reason is that people are afraid of reputation loss. So in our world, there was a very interesting, some of you that read it, in the Bloomberg News about some of the organizations that were under cyber attacks for many, many years, and they were not sharing this information. One of the reasons they were not sharing this information was because of their concerns of reputation loss and what people would think about them once they knew about the specific attack. So collaboration is sometimes challenging. And the point is that, I think the main point is that we all need to think to ourselves, and I think one of the main messages I want to give you guys here is that we have to remember to ourselves, remind ourselves that when we don't share, we jointly may lose. Okay, if we don't share, we may be jointly losing because we're not sharing information, and we're not providing a shared value with each other. So let's go to our world. I think it was a very good introduction to our world. I think that, needless to say, the cyber war is raging on. You heard about it for the last 2 days. You heard about it a lot. Different types of attacks. Every day a new attack that is happening. We hear about it more and more. And the thing is about these attacks that they become more and more sophisticated. So it's very, very typical to what happened with the medical flus, the same thing with viruses. I'm sure you saw the common aspects of the two of them, but spreading of flus and spreading of our viruses in our world spread exponentially in the same way. And if you see this map, this is a map of a spread of a specific virus. Is that a medical virus or it's a cyber virus? It could be both of them, okay? And what you see is that once somebody gets infected, exponentially the rest of the network, rest countries, whatever, also gets infected very, very fast. Actually, in this case, it's actually the H1N1, but it could be even faster in a virus, in a cyber threat or cyber virus. So the main question that we have to ask ourselves once we see this and we are aware of the situation that we're in is that can we really, really afford to fight alone? Can we afford to fight these battles against the bad guys, try to mitigate the different threats that we have inside the organizations by our own? And I think that one of the answers to that comes by the definition of advanced persistent threats. If I look at the word persistence, it's all about being there, the threats that are being there, the sophisticated threats being there for many, many years. And just looking at, this is actually from 2012, and Verizon recently just published the 2013 data breach investigation report. But in the 2012 data breach investigation report, they were talking about 85% of the breaches that they were studying, it took weeks or even more than that to actually discover. And the reason that it takes so much time is because in many cases we're trying to fight by ourselves, with our own knowledge and without sharing information with other organizations, with other people. And yesterday, Tomer Teller was talking about different attacks. Shady Rat was one of the attacks. Shady Rat was an attack happened in 2011. It's about attack 70 different victims around the world, 70 organizations around the world that are actually they infiltrated inside organizations for over 5 to 6 years with APTs and actually gathering information. As Tomer mentioned to all of us yesterday, the attack wasn't that sophisticated, but the point was for 6 years, data was gathered from these 70 different organizations without them knowing. And one of this reasons is because these 70 victims didn't talk to each other. They didn't share the symptoms, the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, in order to create this larger picture, in order to actually create the cure, the remediations faster. So I think that when we said before, once we don't share, we lose. We jointly lose. Because we're not sharing information, we jointly lose. So in a medical environment, with the examples that I mentioned before, and I showed you before, the way that we actually remediate and solve today all kinds of different pandemics, strains, new strains of flu, is with medical collaboration. And then the question is, in our world of cyber malware pandemics, what's the best way to do that? And that, to a large extent, is all about malware threat collaboration. And that is about collaborating the threat information between the different organizations in order to provide faster and more effective ways to actually cure ourselves. So let's go again to this diagram that I mentioned before, the 4 different steps. And let's see how these 4 different steps of collaboration, research, and distribution, let's see how they apply to our world of cyber threats, cybersecurity, and the malware that's in it. So first of all, global sharing of symptoms. It's all about sharing the different pieces of viruses, of malware, the different symptoms that we see today in different attacks. And again, it's the same thing here, different pieces of this jigsaw puzzle that I really want to do research, and I want to do this research in order to create the larger picture, taking these different pieces of the jigsaw puzzle into a larger picture of what's really happening, to understand the attack and what's happening. Then it's about developing signatures, and finally the distribution of the signatures around the world in a very, very fast manner in order to actually create and provide a cure. So as you saw, I took the medical analogy and actually used it in our world, and it fits very, very well. It's about collaboration of data, the research and the distribution of the data itself, and the cures and the remediation. So we're very, very happy. A year ago, we introduced this concept, and we're very proud of it, this infrastructure of Threat Cloud. Gil spoke about it yesterday. And what is Threat Cloud? Threat Cloud is a global collaboration network to fight these threats and attacks. And the next 10 minutes that I have, I would like to talk about, 15 minutes, I would like to talk about Threat Cloud and what Threat Cloud is all about. So first and foremost, it's a very, very large security intelligence repository, encyclopedia, database, dictionary, whatever you want to call it, okay? We introduced Threat Cloud a year ago in CPX last year, CPX Orlando last year. And at the time, when we're talking about this large repository, we're talking about over 250 million addresses, 4.5 million malware signatures, and we were talking about 50,000 updates per day. And a year from that, where we are right now, we're in a situation of 150,000 updates per day. Why? Because of the dynamic environment, we are 280 million addresses in our database, and 12 million malware signatures and 1 million malware-infested websites in this database. So again, it's a staggering number. It's a very large repository of data, okay, of threats that are in there. It's a very large database encyclopedia that all of our customers can benefit from in real time. How does it work, and how does this Threat Cloud database get its information from? So there are the typical or the standard mechanisms, but before I go to the typical standard ones, first of all, we have a large network of sensors. We have tens of sensors around the world that are sniffing, looking at threat events, and actually feeding this information inside the database, into this large cloud infrastructure. Okay, that's number one. In addition to that, we are doing a lot of malware research, and we are developing our own signatures. We are dissecting threats, and I'll be talking about it later on, but we are dissecting information in order to create our own signatures. And we're also using different industry feeds. We're using the best well-known industry feeds for reputation lists, IP reputation lists, URL reputation lists, and we are feeding it into the system also. Okay? So I would like to say these are three common typical environments that we are using. Well, what's quite unique about Threat Cloud is that we are also using the community. We are collaborating also in order to get more information. So the fourth element that we're actually collecting information from is from the network itself, from the security gateways themselves, and we're actually collecting this information. We are collecting attack information only. Nothing sensitive, but we are collecting attack information from the network itself in order to actually provide and feed into Threat Cloud more and more data. So what we are doing today is, once there's a specific attack, we've detected a new bot in a specific gateway around the world, we'll be sending attack information, the IP address of the remote criminal hideout, to Threat Cloud, so that basically the system, the Threat Cloud, knows of this information, and the rest of the network, the rest of the gateways around the world can benefit in real time from this information. Finally, the last element, which is new, the new element here, is actually feeding information from threat emulation. Gil spoke about it yesterday. We also had to meet the expert in details about threat emulation. And the point about threat emulation is that once we've detected through our virtual sandbox environment, we've detected a new or a malicious file, malicious executable, then the first thing that we do after we've actually prevented this file from actually being sent to the recipient, we will actually inform ThreatCloud about this new virus and new malware, this new malicious file, and we'll actually share that through ThreatCloud to the rest of the network. So what we're doing is we are sharing unknown information until now to the rest of the network. So if there was one place around the world that was under an unknown attack, if you think of Shady Rat as an example, as soon as somebody clicked or as soon as somebody shared through threat emulation this malicious file, the rest of the network, the rest of Checkpoint's gateways, the rest of Checkpoint's community of network, or network community, will actually benefit from that quite immediately. I want to show you an example of how it actually works. And I'm actually going to use the same example that actually Gil in his keynote talked about yesterday. So you remember this PDF. This was an actual PDF. We changed some of the names here and so on. But the thing about this PDF, as we showed you yesterday, was that we actually took this PDF and we ran it through the threat emulation sandbox environment. And as you recall, we actually generated this report. In this report we saw, and I wanted just to highlight two things here. We analyzed and we found some suspicious files that were actually created. Okay, so just bear in mind, one of these files that were actually created and opened was a DLL called googleservice.dll, which looks very naive and non-suspicious, but there was nothing that needs to be done once you open a PDF document. Okay, so remember that Google Service DLL. Then we saw some changes in the registry. We also saw some processes that were actually activated. One of them was about the Google service, which was actually using the Google Service DLL. And finally, we also saw some network connectivity or network activity happening. We saw that once we opened this file, then the system, the operating system, was trying to access this specific website, winssldns.org. But anyway, this was a remote command and control hideout. So once this PDF is opened, it opens all kinds of processes and it tries to communicate to the bot herder, the command and control center at that specific hideout. So remember that address and the DLL. Now, what I want to show you, as I mentioned, is that once we find this type of activity, then after we blocked it from the actual recipient, we actually share this information with ThreatCloud. So I want to show you what we're actually doing with it in ThreatCloud. So if we go to our 4 steps here about sharing symptoms, the research, creating signatures and distribution, let's see how this applies to this example over here. So the first thing that we did was we actually shared this PDF and this malicious file with ThreatCloud. Now there are 2 immediate things that we could do. First of all, we found this suspicious DLL. But secondly, we found this new hideout, winssl.dns.org. And immediately we plugged in and fed it to the entire ThreatCloud community. So whenever we see this suspicious URL now, in any of our environments, regardless of that specific PADF or no, we know that somebody's trying to communicate to the outside world for some malicious activity. So that's number 1. We were able to create or actually collect some of these symptoms in order to create a larger picture. The larger picture is to understand and do malware research. In this case here, we have in our labs, we have a research lab, and what we did inside Checkpoint, we actually were able to dissect and diagnose that specific DLL, that Google Service DLL, which looked very, very naive. And apparently what we actually were able to do, and reverse engineer it to understand what's actually doing there, we actually found there command and control functions. Some of the functions were about installing or activating some batch commands on the actual system. It was about installing and uninstalling software. It was about fetching data. So we actually were able to find out that this Google Service.dll was actually activating or actually has the ability to, by remote control, activate multiple command and control commands and controls. Okay? So based on this information, based on understanding what this Google Service naive DLL is actually doing, we were able to develop network signatures. Network signatures are a lot more robust than anything else, because what we're actually doing, we are fingerprinting the protocol, the network protocol between the bot, the machine, the infected machine, and the remote side, okay? And it's not dependent on specific signatures and obfuscations that Tomo was talking about yesterday. It was about looking at this communication protocol. And we were able to actually create and develop a new signature, a network-based signature of this actually communication between that Google Service DLL into the remote hideout. Okay, so again, in this case here, a new vaccine was developed, a new signature was developed out of this new research about the symptoms that we started looking at. And then finally, quite automatically, we're plugging in this new signature, this new network-based signature and fingerprint inside the system. This means that every application, every software that we have that is running, every gateway that's running Antibot today has this new signature in place to actually detect new bots and new communication. Why was it very, very interesting? Because as a result of this new network signature, we were able to detect additional attacks that are using the same protocol, and we were able to find new addresses, new hideouts of bad guys. Okay, so you can think of this iterative process. We were finding this malicious activity, this zero-day attack, this malicious file. We did some research. We created some new network signatures, and we were able to find new hideouts, new addresses that actually provide us more information and enables all of our community to be better secure against malicious activities in their networks. So as I just showed you, and I would like to show you, Threat Cloud is really happening, and it's actually working. It's a very brand new infrastructure, and we'll be talking, Dorit in our technology roadmap will be talking about what we plan to do in the future. But it's actually a very strong and working infrastructure that we already have. We have over 2,500 gateways already connected and actually collaborating these days already. We have new data on bots that we are collecting all the time out of this information. Some of the examples are over there. I mentioned one network signature that we identified in my previous slide, but we've actually developed in the past year about almost 900 different network signatures that help us detect more command and control attacks, more command and control hideouts in the wild today. But more than that, Threat Cloud helped us create the 3D 2013 security report because of all the information we were able to gather there. With this large repository, we were able to actually gather a lot of information. We are now able to create managed services, different types of services based on the information that we're gathering in real time. We have 2 managed services that are based on a lot of the information there based on that. The Threat Cloud Managed Service and the Incident Response Service. Both of them are feeding or getting or gathering a lot of the information, collecting a lot of information from the Threat Cloud. And we are planning to do a lot more that, again, we'll talk about in the next session. We have a lot more research, more feeds we plan to add, more gateways that we want everybody to add into the network, more sensors in our sensor net, in our network of sensors, more services we plan to add based on the information that we're collecting from Threat Cloud, more reports. We're going to continuously add and provide you with reports based on the information that we are gathering. And finally, more interfaces between our products and other products outside there in order to provide a very, very strong and collaborative experience. So I would like to summarize with, again, the phrase or the statement that the Director General of the World Health Organization was saying, we're all in this together. I think that all of you and all of us understand in order to fight against cyber threats, we need to work on this together. So we're all in this together. And I hope that you all agree that we'll get through this together. We need to share and collaborate. And that's the most effective way today to actually fight against cyber threats. So I suggest you to connect and to collaborate into Threat Cloud. Thank you very much.